Welcome to Immersion Travel Italy. I'm Caterina Ferrara, travel author, travel blogger, and your host. Today's episode brings us to Milan, the capital of Lombardy and one of the most powerful cities in Europe, past and present. This is episode 4 of 20 in our Regional Capitals of Italy series. And it's an important one, because Milan is not like any other Italian city. It's Italy's economic engine and its most international city. I visited Milan more times than I can count. It's always been a destination, but also a gateway. We flew into Milan to begin longer journeys. We've used it as a base to explore northern Italy. And more than once, we've stepped off a train here knowing that the next stop will be the lakes or the mountains. Most often, Milan has been our gateway to Lake Como with easy day trips by train that we'll talk about later in the episode. Two places in town always pull me back. The first is the Duomo of Milan, rising out of the city center like something imagined rather than built. And the second is the Pinacoteca Ambrosiana, one of Italy's most extraordinary art collections. With a population of just over 1 million people, Milan often surprises visitors. Milan's history begins as Mediolanum, a Roman city founded centuries before Christ. The name means in the middle of the plain. Milan sits at the heart of northern Italy, positioned perfectly between the Alps and the Po Valley. Whoever controlled Milan controlled access to northern Europe and the Italian peninsula. By the late Roman period, Milan was essential. In the 4th century AD, Milan became the capital of the Western Roman Empire, a role that placed it at the center of political authority at the time when Christianity was transforming from a persecuted faith into an imperial religion. Emperors ruled from Milan, imperial edicts were issued from here, and decisions made in the city shaped both church and state. At the heart of that transformation stood one of the most formidable figures in Catholic history, Saint Ambrose. Ambrose became Bishop of Milan in 374 AD under extraordinary circumstances. At the time, Milan was deeply divided between Nicene Christians and Arians, a theological conflict that threatened civic order. Ambrose, called Saint Ambrogio in Italian, was then a Roman governor, not yet baptized, but he was sent to calm the crowds during the election of a new bishop. Instead, the crowd acclaimed him as bishop on the spot. Within days, Ambrose was baptized, ordained, and consecrated. What followed was one of the most powerful episcopates in Christian history. Ambrose did not see the church as subordinate to imperial authority. He believed moral authority belonged to the church, even over emperors, and he acted accordingly. When Emperor Theodosius ordered a brutal massacre in Thessalonica in 390 AD, Ambrose refused him entry into the cathedral until he publicly repented. This was unprecedented. A bishop denying an emperor access to the church? That moment permanently reshaped the relationship between church and state in the West. It established a principle that would echo for centuries. Emperors rule bodies, but the church governs conscience. Ambrose was a theologian, hymn writer, and architect of the Christian practice. He introduced antiphonal chanting to the Western Church. He wrote influential theological works on the Trinity and the sacraments of the Catholic Church and defended Orthodox Christianity at a time when doctrine was still being defined. His influence reached far beyond Milan. One of the people most profoundly shaped by Ambrose was none other than St. Augustine. Augustine arrived in Milan as a rhetorical and imperial official, skeptical of Christianity and deeply influenced by classical philosophy. He came searching for intellectual clarity, not religious conversion. Then he found Ambrose. Augustine was drawn not by doctrine, but by Ambrose's preaching. Ambrose spoke of intellectual rigor, philosophical depth, and moral clarity. He demonstrated that Christianity could engage the great minds of the classical worlds without retreating into simplicity. Over time, Augustine's resistance gave way. In 387 AD, Augustine was baptized by Ambrose in Milan, traditionally believed to have taken place during the Easter Vigil. That baptism marked one of the most consequential points in Catholic history. Augustine would go on to become the Church's most influential Western theologian. His writings on grace, free will, original sin, time, and the nature of God still shape Christian thought today. And it all began here. Milan was not just the place of Augustine's baptism, but the place where his conversion became possible. I'll mention some other saints that are also tied to Milan. The first is Saint Charles Borromeo, San Carlo Borromeo. Though later in history, he represents Milan's continued leadership in the Catholic Church. As a central figure of the Counter-Reformation, Borromeo implemented the reforms of the Council of Trent that we talked about during last episode, with discipline and compassion, turning Milan into a model for the Catholic renewal. Saint Simplician, Ambrose's mentor and successor, continued Ambrose's theology legacy and played a critical role in Augustine's final steps toward conversion. Saint Gervasius and Saint Protasius, twin brothers and early Christian martyrs, were rediscovered during Ambrose's episcopate. Their relics were placed beneath the altar of the basilica that still bears Ambrose's name, reinforcing Milan's role as a city of wisdom, martyrdom, and faith. To truly understand Milan's Christian identity, we have to stop inside the Basilica of Saint Ambrose, the Saint Ambrose Cathedral. It's not just a church name for the city's powerful bishop, it's an expression of his authority and theology. Founded by Ambrose himself in the 4th century, the basilica remains one of the finest examples of early Christian and Romanesque architecture in Italy. Its austere brick facade, open atrium, and massive arches feel deliberate and grounded. This is not a church designed to dazzle. It's designed to instruct, discipline, and endure. Beneath the altar rest the relics of St. Ambrose alongside St. Gervasius and Protasius, binding theology, martyrdom, and civic identity together in one space. Even today, the basilica reflects the Ambrosian rite, a distinct liturgical tradition still practiced in Milan and surrounding areas. That detail alone tells you how independent and influential the city has been within the Catholic Church. After the fall of Rome, Milan did not fall into obscurity. In the centuries that followed the collapse of imperial authority in Rome, northern Italy fractured into competing powers. Many cities declined, but Milan did not. Its location, wealth, and population allowed it to reassert itself as a political and military force. By the Middle Ages, Milan had emerged as one of the strongest communities in Italy. It fought repeatedly to defend its independence, most famously against Emperor Frederick Barbarossa in the 12th century. Milan was destroyed, rebuilt, and destroyed again, only to return stronger. By the 13th century, power consolidated under a ruling family that understood it better than anyone else, the Viscontis. The Visconti were military strategists and administrators who transformed Milan into a centralized state. They expanded the territory aggressively across Lombardy, imposed order through force, and used architecture as a statement of authority. The original castle in Milan, Castello Sforzesco, was built in the 14th century by Galeazzo II Visconti, designed as a military stronghold, with thick walls, defensive towers, making a clear message to rivals and citizens alike. Authority lived here. When the Visconti line ended, power passed to another dynasty that would shape Milan's identity even more profoundly, the Sforzas. Francesco Sforza, a condottiero who rose through military skill rather than noble birth, took control of Milan in 1450. One of his first acts was to rebuild and expand the fortress, transforming it into what we know today as the Castello Sforzesco. It became a symbol of dynastic legitimacy, a seat of government, and a Renaissance court designed to project strength, stability, and sophistication. Under the Sforza, Milan entered its golden age. It attracted talent that could solve problems, and this is why Leonardo da Vinci came to Milan. Leonardo didn't arrive as a painter. He arrived as an engineer offering services. In his famous letter to Ludovico Sforza, known as Il Moro, Leonardo listed his skills not in art, but military engineering, hydraulic systems, fortifications, and machinery. Painting appeared as an afterthought. Here, Leonardo worked on canal systems, weapon designs, architectural studies, and urban planning. The city's rulers valued the intellect that could build, defend, and modernize the state. The Castello Sforzesco became a physical center of this world. Within its walls, governance, military planning, and cultural patronage existed side by side. Frescoed halls sat next to armories, administrative offices stood near private ducal apartments. Milan fell under Spanish control in the 16th century. Under the Spanish Habsburgs, Milan became a heavily fortified stronghold, one of the most militarized cities in Europe. The castle expanded its defensive role, bureaucracy tightened, and trade continued. In the 18th century, Milan was firmly under Austrian control and governed by the Habsburgs from Vienna. This was not an occupation marked by destruction but reform. The Austrians treated Milan as a model administrative city. They modernized taxation, restructured the government, invested in education, and encouraged Enlightenment ideals. Institutions flourished, efficiency mattered because Europe was changing. The French Revolution sent shockwaves across the continent, and northern Italy quickly became one of the key theaters in a much larger struggle between old empires and new political ideas. Milan's strategic location became impossible to ignore. In 1796, General Napoleon Bonaparte led French forces across the Alps into northern Italy. Napoleon. The Austrian army was defeated in a series of decisive battles, not in Milan itself, but across Lombardy and northern Italy. One of the most important was the Battle of Lodi, fought just southeast of the city. With Austrian power broken in the region, Milan opened its gates. There was no siege of Milan, no great urban struggle. Control shifted because political and military balance around it had collapsed. Napoleon entered the city as a conqueror, but also as a reformer, presenting himself as a liberator from imperial rule. Milan became the capital of the Cisalpine Republic, a French client state, and later the capital of Napoleon's Kingdom of Italy. The city once again found itself elevated. Courts, ministries, and institutions returned. Milan was not reduced to a provincial city, it was reshaped into a capital. In 1805, Napoleon crowned himself the King of Italy in Milan's Duomo, using the Iron Crown of Lombardy. It was a calculated act. By choosing Milan, Napoleon acknowledged centuries of rulers had already understood. Let's next talk about our walking tour and key sites of Milan. Everything in Italy has its center, and it's usually Piazza Duomo. It's true in Milan as well. I remember our first trip to Milan. We arrived, dropped our bags, and did exactly what first-time visitors are supposed to do. We headed straight to Piazza Duomo to meet our guide. Before the tour began, I made a decision. After studying Italian for years and watching more Italian television series than I can count, I decided that if I truly wanted to feel more Italian, I was going to have to start drinking coffee. Now, I realize how ridiculous that sounds. A grown woman, well into adulthood, deciding now is the time to start with espresso? But there I was. My first espresso experience happened right here in Piazza Duomo. It was black and strong and unmistakably bitter. Somehow I got it down. Standing in front of the Duomo, espresso in hand, I remember thinking that something had shifted. In that moment, Milan felt less like a destination and more like an initiation. I finally had entered into Italian daily life, one cup at a time. Rising in the center of the square is the Duomo di Milano, one of the most extraordinary churches ever built. Construction began in the late 14th century and continued for nearly 600 years. The result is a forest of white marble spires, statues, and pinnacles that feels almost unreal. We toured the cathedral and then climbed to the rooftop, something I definitely recommend. Walking among the spires with the city stretching below you gives a completely different perspective on Milan. From above, you can see how old and new coexist, how the city radiates outward from its sacred center, and how much effort went into creating something meant to last long past many lifetimes. And there's a presence you feel most clearly from above. It's the Madonnina. Standing at the highest point of the Duomo is the Madonnina, the gilded statue of the Virgin Mary, which has watched over Milan since 1770. For centuries, Milan had a very clear regulation. No building was allowed to be taller than the Madonnina. When the age of skyscrapers arrived in the 20th century, Milan did what Milan does best. It found a solution. If a building could not rise higher than the Madonnina, it would simply put its own Madonnina on top. Problem solved. The construction of the Duomo of Milano began in 1386, at a moment when Milan was asserting itself as a major European power under the Visconti rulers. From the beginning, the project was intentionally ambitious. It was never meant to be a local church or a regional one. It was designed to rival the great cathedrals of Northern Europe while asserting Milan's independence from Rome's architectural traditions. Unlike most Italian cathedrals, the Duomo is Gothic, but it's a Milanese Gothic. Built almost entirely from white and pink Candolia marble, quarried specifically for this project and transported along a dedicated canal system, the cathedral reflects Milan's talent for logistics and organization as much as artistic vision. The marble alone required an infrastructure project that reshaped the city's waterways. What makes the Duomo truly remarkable is not its size or ornamentation, but timeline. Construction stretched across nearly 6 centuries. Generation after generation contributed to the same vision. Styles evolved, rulers changed, emperors rose and fell. And yet the Duomo continued to rise spire by spire, statue by statue. Today, the cathedral is crowned with 135 spires and over 3,400 statues, making it one of the most sculpturally complex buildings in the world. Saints, prophets, martyrs, biblical figures, and symbolic representations of virtue and vice cover nearly every surface. Stepping inside the Duomo is entirely different. The interior is vast and cool and solemn. Massive pillars rise upward, drawing the eye towards soaring vaults that seem almost too large for human scale. Light filters through stained glass windows that rank among the largest in the world, telling biblical stories through color and shadow. One of the most unforgettable pieces for us in the cathedral was the statue of St. Bartholomew, depicted holding his own skin because he was martyred by removing his skin. It's a powerful and unsettling reminder of the martyrs during the early Catholic faith. It's not meant to be decorative, it's meant to confront you and to remind visitors that faith for centuries has lived at great cost. Sculpted in 1562 by Marco de Grate, the statue reflects Renaissance obsession with anatomy and truth, presenting martyrdom not as an abstraction but as a physical reality. This cathedral also holds the holy nails from the crucifixion, suspended above the altar. I mentioned before one of Milan's most forgettable experiences, and that is the Duomo's rooftop terraces. From above, the cathedral transformed completely. The city disappears and you find yourself moving through a forest of spires and pinnacles and statues. Details carved centuries ago feel intimate. From here, Milan stretches outward in every direction. On clear days, the Alps are visible in the distance, reminding you why Milan has been a city of connection between Italy and Europe. Tickets for the Duomo of Milano's rooftop are available online in advance, and I recommend buying them early because we had to wait in line. Waiting in line is never good use of your vacation time. The Duomo is not only Milan's architectural center, but one of the most important festivals happens here. Each year on January 6th, Milan celebrates the Epiphany, the Feast of the Three Kings, one of the city's most significant religious observances. The Duomo becomes the spiritual focal point of celebration with solemn liturgies, processions, and traditions that reflect Milan's deep Christian roots. I do recommend you follow me at Caterina Ferrara Author on Instagram because I do have images of this very Festival of the Three Kings on my Instagram. Epiphany in Milan is somewhat theatrical. It's dignified and ceremonial and rooted in centuries of devotion. This festival, along with others and all of the sites of Milan, which I can't cover everything here, are in my ultimate festival and travel guide, Milan and Lombardy, which is available on Amazon and via my website, caterinaferrara.com. The next place we're going to stop just a few steps from Piazza Duomo is the Galleria Vittorio Emanuele II. Built in the 19th century and named for Italy's first king, the Galleria was conceived as a symbol of unified modern nation. Iron, glass, and stone come together in a soaring cross-shaped structure crowned by a vast glass dome, flooding the interior with light, but protecting it from the elements. From the beginning, this was meant to be Milan's living room. Cafes, restaurants, and luxury shops line the arcades, but what gives the Galleria its character is how it's used. Locals pass through it daily. Business meetings happen over coffee. Evening strolls begin here. Of course, the tourists visit as well. Look down the mosaic floors in the center and you'll see the famous bull, a symbol of Turin. Tradition says that spinning on the bull's anatomy with your heel brings good luck. Locals do it and visitors copy them, and the floor bears the evidence. I want to mention a breakfast stop here, which is the Pasticceria Marchesi, 1824. If you want an iconic coffee shop, this is it. Marchesi has been part of Milan's daily life since the 19th century and remains one of the city's most respected historic pasticcerie or pastry shops. Located inside the Galleria Vittorio Emanuele, it's the perfect pause between the Duomo or after your tour. Expect beautifully executed pastries, excellent espresso, and an atmosphere that feels elegant. Just beyond the Galleria stands the Teatro, alla Scala, one of the most important opera houses in the world. Inside, the theater opens into red velvet with gilded balconies and acoustics so precise they're studied as much as admired. This is where Verdi premiered works that became inseparable from the Italian identity, where conductors, singers, and composers were judged mercilessly by one of the most demanding audiences in Europe. The opening night each year of La Scala takes place on December 7th, deliberately chosen to coincide with the feast of Saint Ambrose, Milan's patron saint. Historically, this was an event reserved for the city's elite, accessible through family boxes and patronage rather than public tickets. And while today the process is more formalized, opening night remains one of the most exclusive evenings in Italian life. December 7th is one of the most important days on the city's calendar, when faith, culture, and civic identity, while Milan's elites gather in elegant dress for the opening of La Scala, the rest of the city celebrates in a different way, just beyond the theater walls. Each year, the Obey Market opens at the same time, transforming the area around Castello Sforzesco into a lively winter festival. Stalls fill the streets with sweets, roasted chestnuts, mulled wine, toys, crafts, and traditional Lombard specialties. Families wander through the market. Children run behind them. Locals meet friends and neighbors, lingering despite the cold. One of my favorite places in Milan is the Pinacoteca Ambrosiana, tucked just east of Piazza Duomo. Founded in 1618 by Federico Borromeo, the Ambrosiana was conceived not as a private collection, but as a public institution dedicated to education, scholarship, and moral formation. Inside, you'll encounter works of staggering importance, presented with restraint. Among them is Caravaggio's Basket of Fruit, a painting so precise and alive it feels almost like a photograph. The Ambrosiana is also home to one of the most extraordinary treasures in Lombardy, Leonardo da Vinci's Codex Atlanticus, the largest collection of Leonardo's drawings and writings in the world. These pages reveal Milan exactly as Leonardo experienced it, a city of canals, machines, engineering problems, and intellectual ambition. By this point in the walk, it's probably time for lunch. After a morning of history and churches and streets layered with meaning, it's necessary. Our guide recommended a place that felt completely Milanese. We stopped at the Trattoria Torre di Pisa. This is a long-standing trattoria that the locals rely on. Nothing trendy, just Lombard cooking served in a relaxed and welcoming atmosphere. The menu focused on traditional dishes like risotto, pasta, and meat that felt rooted in the region rather than reinvented for visitors. It's ideally located close to the historic center, and lunch is a great chance to slow down, refuel, and experience Milan the way the people who live here do. Also need to mention the historic center of Brera, home to the Accademia di Belle Arti and the Pinacoteca di Brera. This neighborhood has long attracted artists, scholars, and thinkers. Streets here feel more intimate, cafes are for lingering, and conversation replaces spectacle. We also need to move toward that seat of secular power, the Castello Sforzesco. This is where Leonardo da Vinci worked, not as an artist, but as an engineer and thinker. Inside the castle, Leonardo painted frescoes, designed theatrical machinery, studied fortifications, and contributed to intellectual life of the court. One of his surviving works, the Sala delle Asse, reveals Milan's approach to beauty. Nature is stylized, engineered, and symbolic. After the fall of the Sforza, the castle passed through Spanish, French, and Austrian hands. Each occupying power reinforced its military role, expanding defenses and adapting the structure to new forms of warfare. Today, the Castello Sforzesco houses several museums, archives, and collections, including sculpture, decorative arts, and historic artifacts tied to Milan's ruling past. Beyond the castle gates, Milan opens suddenly into the Parco Sempione. This is a broad green public space that's used by locals. It creates a distance between authority and expansion. Historically, it was the buffer zone around the fortress. At the far end of the park rises the Arca della Pace, the Arch of Peace, a 19th century monument that once marked the road toward northern Europe. In the summer, Castello Sforzesco shifts from a symbol of historic authority to one of Milan's most atmospheric cultural stages. The castle courtyards and surrounding spaces host an annual program of open-air concerts, theater, film screenings, and cultural performances that draw locals back into the heart of the city after sunset. It's called Estate Sforzesco. Classical music, jazz, contemporary performances, spoken word events unfold beneath the towers and stone walls, creating a powerful contrast between Renaissance architecture and modern life. The summer evenings feel unmistakably Milanese, elegant without being formal, cultural without being exclusive. Sitting under the open sky, surrounded by centuries of history, your experience at the castle is part of a living history of the city's rhythm. For an aperitivo, a crowd pleaser, in Piazza Duomo is Terrazza Aperol. It offers a relaxed terrace setting with one of the best people-watching views in the city. It's casual, social, and perfectly placed for a late afternoon pause when the city begins to shift gear. For dinner, Savini is a fantastic recommendation if you want something historic, elegant, and special without crossing into fine dining. Located in the Galleria, Savini has hosted writers, artists, and intellectuals for centuries. The menu blends Milanese tradition with refined Italian cooking, and the setting feels celebratory, especially in the evening. Next, we need to talk about a few activities in Milan, and one of them is to see the Last Supper. Before we talk about the Last Supper, it's important to understand the place that holds it. Santa Maria delle Grazie is a church that was commissioned in the late 15th century by Lodovico Sforza as both a Dominican convent and a dynastic statement. This was the Sforza family's spiritual anchor, designed to project legitimacy, refinement, and divine favor. Leonardo's refectory painting belongs here not by accident but by intention. This was a court church tied to the ruling family, where art served as power, intellect, and faith simultaneously. Seeing the Last Supper is one of the most sought-after experiences in Italy, and for many travelers, it's the reason Milan is on the itinerary at all. Leonardo da Vinci's Cenacolo, is what it's called in Italian, is housed inside the refectory of Santa Maria delle Grazie, right where it was painted in the late 15th century. It was created for this space, for the monks who dined beneath it, and for court culture that understood symbolism, psychology, and power. Leonardo experimented here. Instead of painting traditional fresco, he used a dry technique that allowed for greater detail and expression. It also meant that the painting began deteriorating almost immediately. Over centuries, it survived humidity, neglect, repainting, war damage, and near destruction during World War II. What you see today is one of the most complex restorations ever attempted. The fragility explains how it's viewed today. Only a small number of people are allowed in at a time. Visits are limited to 15 minutes. Tickets sell out months in advance. It takes effort to get in here, but it's part of the experience. You need to plan early and book your tickets as far in advance as possible. Use official channels or you can get tricked. I've been tricked. Avoid inflated resale prices or last-minute promises. If the tickets appear sold out, don't give up immediately. You can check with tour operators, and cancellations do happen. As far as food tours and culinary experiences, Milanese food is often misunderstood. It's not rustic in the southern sense, and it's not theatrical. Lombard cuisine is seasonal and rooted in agriculture rather than spectacle. A guided food tour can introduce you to the culinary logic. You'll learn how saffron defines risotto alla Milanese, why cotoletta is treated as a sacred subject, and how cheeses from Lombardy and the nearby Alps shape the local table. You'll also encounter panettone, not as a holiday treat, but as a Milanese invention with deep roots in the city's baking tradition. Another spot, one of the simplest and most revealing experiences in Milan, happens every evening at the Navigli, the aperitivo stop. In the Navigli district, canals originally engineered and improved during Leonardo da Vinci's time come alive as the day winds down. We saw locals gathering after work, locals bringing the kids home from school and walking their dogs. Here, glasses clink, conversation stretches across. It's a pause. You order a drink and some small bites and breathe in daily Milanese life. Milan is obviously known for fashion, and if you're not here during Fashion Week, some of the most interesting experiences involve guided walks through the Quadrilateral, where fashion history is tied to urban planning and commerce. You can see tailoring traditions, textile workshops, and some of the discipline behind the Italian style. Next, I want to mention just a few day trips. Milan has functioned as a hub for transport for centuries. There are many cities that are easy excursions from Milan. The first one I want to mention is Lake Como. On one trip, my friend and I stayed in Milan and used Milano Centrale, this train station, as our jumping off point. No car, no stress, just direct trains, frequent departures, and reasonable prices. Our first trip was to Como. Travel time from Milan is between 35 and 60 minutes by train, depending on your destination. Trains run often, and within an hour, atmosphere shifts completely. Mountains rise sharply from the water, the air feels cooler, the pace slows. We took first a train to Como for a day, the lake's southern gateway. And from here, when we added the ferry, which I highly recommend doing, you can see a lot of the lake and get perspective you won't get from land. Lake Como has long been a retreat for the Milanese elites. Roman villas once outlined the shores. Later, nobles and industrialists built grand residences here, drawn by the lake's beauty and its proximity to power. From Como, ferries connect you to the lake's most iconic villages. Bellagio offers excellence and postcard views. Verona feels quieter and more intimate, with steep stone lanes and flower-lined balconies. If Como's in your plans, I recommend you visit my podcast series, a 5-part series on Lake Como, what to see, what to do, and how to get around. Our next day trip is going to be to Bergamo, about 50 minutes by train. On one trip, instead of taking the train, we actually drove to Bergamo to visit the Città Alta, the fortified upper city. We explored this with a guide. From the modern lower town, the shift is immediate. You ascend through the funivia, the funicular, into a place that's deliberately protected. Encircled by massive Venetian walls, Bergamo feels completely different than Milan. This is a city meant to be enjoyed. Narrow streets, heavy stone buildings, and layered piazzas speak to centuries of military importance. When Bergamo fell under Venetian control in the 15th century, it became the westernmost outpost of the Venetian Republic, guarding vital trade routes and territory. When you walk along the walls, the geography explains everything. On one side, the Lombard plain stretches toward Milan. On the other, land rises toward the Alps. Inside the old city, we arrived at Piazza Vecchia, and I remember feeling an unexpected sense of joy standing there. The space is intimate and perfectly balanced, framed by civic buildings, and just steps away from both the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore and the Colleoni Chapel. Both churches, but very distinct. The Basilica feels ancient and grounding, and the Colleoni Chapel, with its elaborate facade, is a Renaissance masterpiece on full display. Our next day trip is Crema. It's about an hour by train. Crema is often overlooked, which is exactly why I include it as a day trip. Located east of Milan, it's a small but refined Lombard city shaped by trade, agriculture, and quiet prosperity. The historic center is calm and elegant, anchored by its cathedral, with a richly decorated facade and an interior that reflects regional pride. Streets are orderly, piazzas are lived in. Crema is known internationally for its association with Call Me By Your Name, but the city's appeal runs deeper. It represents everyday Lombardy, prosperous, cultured, and understated. As a day trip, Crema offers something rare, authenticity without effort. It shows you that Lombard cities actually function far from the tourism narratives. Our last day trip will be 30 minutes by train to Pavia. South of Milan lies Pavia, a city with deep royal and religious roots. Pavia was once the capital of the Lombard kingdom, long before Milan assumed its dominant role. Its historic center reflects that legacy with Roman remains, medieval towers, and a university founded in the 14th century that still shapes the city's life. But the true reason to come here lies just outside the city. The Certosa di Pavia is one of the most extraordinary monastic complexes in Italy. Built in the 14th century by the Visconti rulers of Milan, it was designed to impress both God and subjects. The facade alone is overwhelming. Marble sculpture, symmetry, all combine into a statement of dynastic piety and power. Inside, the cloisters and church reveal the quieter side of monastic life, balancing extraordinary artistic richness. This is where Milan's rulers displayed devotion through scale. As a day trip, Pavia and the Certosa deepen your understanding of Milan's political and religious ambition, showing how power extended beyond the city itself. As I wrap up this episode, I want to remind you that the ultimate festival and travel guide, Milan and Lombardy, by me, Caterina Ferrara, goes deeper into the city's history. It goes deeper into the neighborhoods and all of the towns of Lombardy, including Cortina d'Ampezzo, where the Olympics are taking place. Each chapter includes walking tours, restaurants. I have where you should stay and what you should see. The book is available on Amazon. You can just search Caterina with a K, Ferrara, or you can find the book links on my page, caterinaferrara.com. Whether you're planning a trip, researching the 2026 Winter Olympics, or simply want to understand Milan beyond the headlines, the guide is designed to help you experience the cities of Lombardy with depth and context. And as always, I love hearing from you. If you have questions about Milan, Lombardy, or ideas for future episodes or destinations you'd like to hear featured in the series, you can email me directly at caterina@caterinaferrara.com or reach out to me using the contact page on my website. Thank you for joining me on this Immersion Travel Italy series. Until next time, travel slowly, travel intentionally, and let the places you visit tell their stories.